I'm going to invite John White, our Chief Operating Officer, to set a bit of context. John's going to tell us a little bit about the space and then really where all this work has come from, where the webinars come about. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Linda. So I am a middle-aged white man, also continuing Linda's blue theme. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt and round glasses, which are subtly blue tinted as well. And I have short brown hair, although rather less of it than I used to have when I started this job 10 years ago. A little bit about the space. We were set up roughly 10 years ago by the Arts Council BBC. We're a digital commissioning and development organisation, and we work across the UK with artists, individual creative practitioners, cultural organisations and community groups. And we offer a wide range of digital support services. That includes commissioning digital content, providing funding. We enable broadcast and distribution partnerships, and we help the sector to develop digital skills through mentoring, training, webinars and consultancy work. And we help the people we work with to create and distribute high quality content online, to find TV or radio broadcast opportunities, and also to deliver accessible digital experiences in venues, whether that's live events in buildings or at festivals. A lot of the work we do, including this webinar, is funded by Arts Council England. And just a little bit of background to the reason for this webinar. So going back as far as 2019, we were aware through our networks that there was an uplift in online abuse in the cultural sector. And because of that, we did a little bit of a survey to try and understand the landscape a bit better. And that showed us that in the past year, 42% of the people who responded had received some form of online attack, either them individually or the organisations they worked for. And only 17% of those felt that they knew how to deal with it in a practical way. At the same time as that, we'd commissioned the writer and theatre maker Javed Alapur to create a broadcast version of a piece called The Believers Are But Brothers. And this was a piece which dealt with how young men are recruited into online extremism. And because of the themes of that piece, we identified sort of potential risks to the artists. So we did some planning work with security experts at the BBC, looking at how we might minimise those risks. And having done that, we felt that others might benefit from that experience. And so we worked with Rowan, who'll be speaking in a bit, to look at some practical advice and some case studies that we could share. And that's resulted in the Online Abuse Toolkit, which can be downloaded from our website, and there'll be a link in the chat in a sec. And there was a webinar that we ran to discuss and share those learnings. In the audience for that webinar was Charlie and colleagues from Historic Royal Palaces. And so when a little while ago they themselves started experiencing increased volume of online abuse, they came to talk to us about ways in which we might be able to help them strengthen their policies and processes, make sure they were aligned with organisational vision and mission. And it's that work which has led to us involving our own thinking and theirs, and coming up with some more insights which we thought were worth hosting a webinar to share those more widely and develop thinking on good practice. And in addition to this sort of free training and resources, the toolkit and the webinar that we're able to offer, we do that paid for consultancy work and training. And so there'll be a link in the chat as well about that for any of you who are interested in a bit more hands-on support. But yeah, that's enough scene setting from me. Back to you, Linda. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Thank you. I'm going to ask the rest of the panel to join now. And then we'll kind of kick off with our first session, really thinking about, okay, so what are some of the challenges that people are facing? And we know from the responses that you, attendees, sent in advance that there is a whole range of experience of online abuse and hate. So we'll just sort of set a bit of context, and then we'll go into kind of some of the ways in which that can be faced. So I'm going to start with Charlie, and I know, Charlie, you and Rowan are going to do more of a case study a little bit later on, but just sort of to kick us off, will you introduce yourself, describe yourself, and say a little bit about the kinds of sort of hateful social media engagement, shall we call it, that you've been facing at Historic Royal Palaces?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm a white woman with blonde hair, and I also have a blue jumper on, so we're all in blue. So I'm social media manager at Historic Royal Palaces, and it's my team that runs 14 social media channels for the charity. So that's the HRP channels across Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. And then we also have site pages for palaces. So Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington Palace, and a few others as well. So we look after 6 different sites. People are sort of often surprised that an organisation like ours might be subject to online abuse or hate. So I think an important point to make here is kind of how our identity opens us up to this online abuse. So we have a point to make here is we have clear links to the royal family. We care for historic palaces, but we're an entirely separate organisation. And our following, as you expect, is largely interested in, say, British history. They love pomp and ceremony. They express pride in being British. And our audience is like generally pro-monarchy. And HRP has a new organisational strategy this year, and something that we've been working towards more, which at its heart is about reaching new audiences. So telling inclusive stories and being accessible and welcoming to all. And I think sometimes the content that we're posting that supports this strategy and HRP's values as a charity can be at odds with what our audience expects and assumes that we stand for. And a lot of our kind of online hate or online abuse issues kind of, I think, stems from this, the kind of disconnect in a way. And before coming to the space, so as John said, we sort of reached out and been working with the space, which we'll talk about later on, but the largest volume of hate that we were experiencing was on our paid ad marketing. So we were getting a large quantity of hateful and racist comments on our paid ads. So if the volume is really hard to quantify, but around a 2-week period, our team of 2 or 3 were hiding about 700 hateful comments. So that kind of gives you a sense of volume. And then we also have experienced it on our organic pages, but on organic pages, it's much more isolated and nuanced. So it's often in responses to histories that we're telling, posts that have a specific content that people are responding to, and sometimes has been directed at members of staff that are fronting the videos as well. So kind of twofold. We had the paid ad comments, which were more direct, and then the organic comments, which I would say are a bit more nuanced and clever, wider discussion points. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Charlie. Let's bring Danielle in now. So I know that you two have been speaking about some of the challenges you've been facing. And Danielle, do you want to just give us a bit of context to how things are going at the National Trust?
Yeah, of course.
Oh,
so
and introduce yourself, sorry, and describe yourself.
Yes. Hello, so I'm Danielle. I'm the social media manager for the National Trust. I'm also wearing blue, and I have dark hair and a very 2000s emo side fringe going on. As social manager for the National Trust, my team look after what we refer to as the whole trust accounts, which is any of the accounts with @National Trust. We also advise and guide all of our property and regional teams, and in total that comes to a little over 700 social media accounts. So it's great fun. My experience is very similar to Charlie's when it comes to paid ads and organic posts. However, at the Trust, I think we also have a bit more of a media angle in this, because we are one of those organizations caught up in the culture wars, and anything we do outside of our traditions will often end up in the media, which then spills over into social for us. But as an organization, we're really trying to grow into our strapline, which is for everyone forever. And vocal people online aren't always the same as real life. So it's been really interesting to see the crossover between the hatred we're getting on social and the response to the media stuff that is coming in. Charlie and I met through a networking group for social media leads in arts and heritage, and it's been a huge topic for everybody in that group, especially when it comes to things like awareness months, or say as soon as Pride kicks off, everybody's in the chat going, oh my God, help, this is horrible. And so it's been really nice to have a network and people to discuss this with, even if it's a really, horrible topic to have to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we'll come back to that, won't we? The idea of sort of networks and
Yes.
how the sector supports, how do people support each other, and
Mm-hmm.
make this a place where you can talk. Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Haydn, can I bring you in? So you work with a wide range of organisations across arts and culture. What have you been noticing? Is there anything that you'd particularly want to add to that?
I think for me, it will, so first of all, yeah, Haydn, I'm a black male. I am wearing a white hooded jumper and I am now almost 42. So I'm getting on. So for me, I think what I've really noticed the most is the overwhelming nature of it all for cultural digital professionals and not actually knowing how to deal with it in the first place. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that there's not the processes in place in the first place for social professionals to actually understand what to do when it comes to getting hate comments, or when it comes to having campaigns that might be provocative and then not having a plan in place to deal with it in the first place. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that a lot of people in arts and culture, not all, but a lot of them who work within digital or social tend to just be placed there. It's not something because their main job or their main role. So they don't have the expertise or the skill set through no fault of their own to actually deal with scenarios, or even understanding how the nature of the internet and the nature of the platforms that they're using. And again, that's not through no fault of their own. It's just that it wasn't what they were originally hired for. So I think most of it just comes down to that kind of little bit of lack of experience, that and the understanding of the role that social media plays and the role that they play, which is basically the front line of the comms for most cultural organizations.
Thank you very much. And I guess that what you're talking about, particularly people in smaller organisations where you end up doing a bit of this and a bit of that, your role changes in response to what else is going on, rather than in those bigger organisations where Charlie and Danielle are placed, where you've got a whole team of people. So we'll come back to that, because I think it's really useful for our audience to know whether you're in a place with a big setup, or you're working on your own, or as an individual artist, what can you do?
You'll be surprised, even with larger organizations, and I know Danielle and Charlie are lucky that they've got their team there, but even large organizations have small teams, small marketing and digital teams. So yeah, but you can touch across all of that throughout the session.
Thank you very much. And Rowan, you've recently looked at our online abuse toolkit, the Spaces Online Abuse Toolkit, and updated it rather. So I just wondered, what are you noticing? What's changed since it was first published? And is there particular examples? I mean, I know we've had lots of examples from people before the webinar, some of the organisations coming along talking about what's happening to them. What are you noticing?
I'll start with my intro. I am a white lady in my 40s. I've got reddish hair and I've bucked the trend with a greenish top that's got zebras on it. But to answer your question, Linda, my short answer is that sort of sadly, there hasn't really been that much change, I don't think, in this area much over the last few years. I guess the one big change that we can sort of see coming is the UK's Online Safety Act, which was obviously made law last year. In super short form, it just requires the online platforms, to protect users more from illegal content and online harms. And, it requires them to be more transparent about how they're dealing with those online harms. But it isn't really being enforced until next year. So this is really a kind of watch this space in regards to how Ofcom, who are the regulator for that law, how they kind of deal with the platforms on that front. But, really we can see reports that online abuse is just sort of sadly and dispiritingly increasing, and we can see reports recently it's increasing for politicians, for public officials, for elite athletes, for young people. So I'm sorry to say there's sort of no data really that makes me think it's decreasing for anyone else or for those of us in the kind of cultural sector. For myself, I've found that I'm being asked more and more to help organisations deal with sort of highly negative, really challenging and hateful commentary online. On the one hand, we can see continued racist, misogynistic, homophobic, xenophobic commentary and abuse. But then on the other hand, I'd say that we can also see what we might think of as sort of more liberal people attacking those that they don't agree with. I sort of feel like some of today's societal issues are sort of so complicated that it makes it really difficult for organisations to comment and to be allies unless they've got like really strong communications policies covering what they do and they don't talk about. And I think you can see some organisations kind of coming unstuck in that area. But really many of the issues that we deal with in social media are not really social media issues, they're just societal issues. And because social media holds up a mirror to society, we have all, everyone at this event dealing with social have just got so much to deal with right now because society is dealing with so much right now. I did take a look at the comments and the questions that people sent, and I could see in those that there's loads of people out there dealing just with exactly that, really challenging levels of negativity and hate. People trying to navigate the line between freedom of speech and dealing with hate speech, which can be particularly hard if you don't have a kind of consensus, particularly among your stakeholders. Comments reinforcing that so much of this abuse is really aimed at underrepresented groups, but also inclusive content, inclusive language, inclusive events, organisations very often being accused of being too woke around inclusivity. I could see there's an interesting thing that people are very often actually dealing with individuals. It's not always big groups of trolls that are coming from elsewhere. Individual people can be causing huge amounts of disruption. And as an aside, I know I've seen sort of individual influencers sometimes beginning to point at organisations that they don't agree with and kind of sending their followers to sort of almost attack them online, which can be terribly challenging. There were gross abuses of staff privacy being talked about in the comments and questions people sent. So an example of someone taking photos of team members and then naming and shaming them on social media. There were reports of people being harassed for not responding quickly enough as the social media reps. And there was sort of one line that kind of summed it up, I fear, for many, when they said, no matter what we say, it never seems to be right.
Right, thank you very much.
Sorry, it's a dispiriting start.
But that's the point, really. We're sort of saying, well, what is going on here, and what is it that we're dealing with? And some of these questions we'll come back to. So I think what you were just saying was really echoing what Danielle said earlier about the crossover between social media and traditional media as well, and groups going to, you know, when things move from one platform to another, how do you manage all of that when it becomes out of your control? Does anybody, any of the panel at this point, have any last points that they want to make? Is there anything that's it's sparked in any of you listening to each other?
No, just about that last point. I suppose that is one of the issues with cultural organisations, that comms is across the board at this point, and social doesn't mean comms, doesn't mean communication. There's social, you've got your website, you've got your newsletter, you've got PR, you've got traditional media. It has to be part of your overall comm strategy. Your digital strategy will be combined with both, and that goes with your content strategy as well. It's all one thing at this point, and there's still a lot of cultural organizations that silo in it, so everything is still siloed in the individual spots. Even down to paid, I know a lot of cultural organizations whose paid strategist or paid is done by agencies, and so again, it's done totally separate to the rest of the comms team. So just getting more of that kind of unified thinking will definitely help with some of the issues we're talking about later.
So, somebody from the audience made a comment about the paid, saying how she says they say the paid ad is where I've experienced hate too, super weird and frustrating. sometimes seemed more like it was bots. I'm not sure I can tell the difference. So whether it's actually even a person doing it. So a lot to think about there. In the audience, does anybody else have any particular questions at this point? We're going to move on to really thinking about, okay, so how are some of the ways that people are tackling all of this? But I'll just see if there's any questions from the audience at this point. Okay, so nothing coming up right now. So Haydn and Danielle, you can turn your cameras off for a little bit because I'm going to get into the sort of the discussion. Thank you so much for that in really interesting start. We're going to start with Charlie and Rowan talking in a bit more detail about the piece of work that you did. So Charlie, do you want to kind of carry on? Sort of, you started off sort of setting a context of what's going on for historic royal palaces. Do you want to sort of carry on with that and sort of keep on setting the scene and thinking about what happened? Why did you get the space involved? What were some of the challenges? And then we'll think about how you responded to those.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've sort of set out in my intro how we were experiencing the online hate. So paid ads and then organic content as well. So we decided we did need to do some work in this area. I, as Danielle said, had watched and discussed with other colleagues in organisations who had similar experiences, and also organisations who had sort of sustained huge attacks on social media. You know, sometimes and most of the time, these attacks they're not expected. They sort of come out the blue, and suddenly you're in the midst of this online world where you just don't know where to go. And a big part of this for us was looking at us internally and also other organizations, and seeing that internal policies and guidance were just not in place to prepare people when these things happened. And so the work for us was really about preparation, in the knowledge that it's a real threat. It can happen without warning, and it's quite likely more and more to happen. So we did have moderation rules in place. We had some house rules, but we really wanted to make them more robust and clear up areas where members of the team were having to use their sort of personal opinion and judgment rather than having really clear guidelines for HRP. So that was our main reason for reaching out. I think secondly as well, the fear of online abuse and response was beginning to hinder our ability to deliver content for the new strategy. So I would say our spokespeople became more nervous with kind of an online world that's increasingly negative. And a lot of them, unfortunately, had previous experiences of online hate and abuse. And so our teams were sort of losing confidence with creating this content and feeling equipped to deal with what might come from that. And therefore hindering our ability to really deliver the content we wanted to. And the last point really around this, for me personally, was that I think a lot of people in social media might relate to this, but I certainly I've been working in social media now for 10 years, and I think I started to become really desensitized to online hate. I was getting to the point where it took really quite a lot to shock me. And I felt that it was really important that we began to reach externally for fresh eyes on the situation and an objective perspective, because I was beginning to read a lot of this stuff. And just because you read a lot of it doesn't make it okay. We needed to kind of equip ourselves in our response to it. So that's why we sort of reached out to the space. But the key things for us were, how can we change our moderation policies so that the members of the team who are responsible for moderation feel empowered and supported? How do we prepare ourselves for the next time we have a big barrage of online hate, so that we're more prepared for that onslaught when it might happen? And also, what can we do to safeguard our staff and spokespeople that are fronting these videos, or maybe, you know, whose names are on exhibitions, things like that, to say, so that they're more confident in the content that we're delivering. So I think that's kind of my outlining of the problem. Probably here the point to kind of pass over to Rowan, really, because Rowan, we all sort of worked together on the response. So I'll pass over to Rowan in terms of the response and what we did.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack. So I'm just going to kind of step through what we did to really hopefully give people an idea of maybe what they could do if that was useful. So I'm going to start with what we did around moderation. So I really started by looking at the house rules that HRP were using, their policies, their objectives in this area, because obviously that colours what you do, how you approach it, and sort of really dug into things like moderation logs to really get into kind of what was happening on the coal face of their comments. I also spoke to various people who were impacted by all of those issues that Charlie's just been outlining. So that was people in the moderation team, the marketing team, the curation team, who are HRP's experts. And doing that really helped me to see not just the kind of finer details, but also actually the wider picture. How, for example, creating inclusive content actually takes more time and can put curators, the experts, kind of at risk a bit more professionally and personally. And even though HRP did have good house rules and guidelines, it really felt like the moderators, as Charlie's already said, were kind of regularly using subjective opinion about what was offensive or what might be breaking those house rules, etc. And there's really no doubt to me that speaking to those people and almost taking a sideways nod at what Haydn said earlier, kind of trying to pull all of this communication together, really helped to strengthen the project and the changes that we put in place. I then developed with Charlie and Laura at HRP and John at the Space new house rules and points of guidance for the moderators, which took into account the biggest areas of difficulty which we could see being expressed in the comments. It took into account what I'd learned from others and obviously my own experience of working in moderation for a long time. Like laws that govern how we behave, house rules kind of tread the line between freedom of speech and creating community spaces which are valuable for people, places where people can actually agree to disagree and where they can learn and communicate. So I think, you know, we felt like if there are so many comments that are really highly offensive and hugely off-putting for so many people in these spaces, then you sort of start getting to the point where you're like, what's the point in offering these spaces if they're largely argumentative and really quite off-putting? So for the house rules, to give some examples of what we actually did, the fine-grained detail, we recommended no longer permitting comments which were off-topic for HRP, its palaces and history, which really reduced the kind of political slanging matches and arguments that we could see, for example. We put in place rules which sort of like strengthening moderation of offensive comments, so especially around discrimination of protected characteristics, and vitally moderating for implied meaning. I think that was a really useful thing for us to consider and talk about, as sort of many online commenters are really good at kind of implying offence and starting arguments, even though on the face of it, those comments aren't necessarily offensive, but what they really mean is. We created guidelines and a process for when people would be blocked. So we were really clear about that for consistency. And also when HRP's moderators or the social media team, etc., would reply to people. So we really thought about that and thought about when it was valuable to do that and when it was valuable for HRP and valuable for users. So all of that was really about kind of creating consistency for HRP's approach to moderation, rather than individual moderators having to kind of think, is this one offensive? Does it offend you? Does it offend me? We also recommended that HRP consider using external moderation to reduce the workload for their moderators, especially at their sort of busiest times. And before finalising the house rules, we walked all the moderators through the changes and took back their feedback, which helped to improve them even more. one part that I think is really critical is transparency for me. So once the new house rules had been finalised and kind of agreed at high level, they were also published on HRP's website so that anyone can see them and know what the rules are. And I know that they're pointed to. One of the things we talked about in replying to people in conversations was when a conversation gets a bit out of hand, those rules are kind of posted as a reminder to everybody about kind of the framework that they're operating in. A really critical part of this was communicating with HRP's executive team. So we presented the project's recommendations to the exec team. And as external consultants, I think we were able to lay out the kind of the wider picture, the scale of the issue, the impact on staff, as well as all of these potential solutions. And HRP's team were fantastically receptive, especially around safeguarding of their staff and teams. And they brought up points as well that fed back into strengthening them even further. And I know that they agreed actually to all of our proposals, I think, and subsequently even agreed to the external moderation, which I think Charlie will talk about. And the last point was that we worked on safeguarding HRP staff further. So including those who kind of present and appear in HRP's videos, so the curatorial team. And those videos are sort of obviously published on HRP's social channels. And for this, what we did was that we built more points into the house rules about sexual objectification and commenting on appearance. We carried out online safety training with certain teams, and we recommended that the teams kind of hold wellbeing check-ins in this area. And I know that that's something that's been done as well. And as with anything related to social media, it isn't a project which is kind of like done and dusted. We kind of really aimed to create living documents which are reviewed and updated, because obviously in this area everything evolves all the time. But I think the impact's been really positive for HRP's staff, and I know that Charlie's going to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, I think here I'll sort of talk around, now that Rowan set out the kind of response we had, the impact of those responses, because we've been working with the new house rules for a few months now. And I think the first thing that's really important here is I can't estimate the importance of our own well-being in this area of work. With discussions with colleagues, so many people ask, oh, how do you switch off at the end of the day? How do you turn off that laptop and just think, go leave it all at work, because we're dealing with kind of really hateful content. And I think one of the biggest changes we've had here is having the house rules and clear rules to follow meant that our team's decisions on moderation were not personal decisions anymore. It's not what the individual moderator disagreed with or felt was upsetting that mattered. It's to do with the organisation, and therefore feedback from our team has been that they're able to make those decisions with a degree of distance, and therefore, more able to distance themselves from the comments that they're reading. And I think that's a really important point, where policy feels like policy and it feels like rules, but actually it can really help our day-to-day working and our own well-being when it comes to approaching these areas. As Rowan said, it also gave us huge visibility in the organisation. I think senior members of staff were really shocked by the volume and the types of comments that teams are moderating. And I think working in social media, you realise, my team will be dealing with a lot of these comments. And if your moderation is pretty good, people are not seeing those comments and they're not aware of them, because that's our goal here. But that's not to say that the work is not going on, and the visibility really helped us in the organisation, not just moral support and kind of the knowledge that other people know that that's what we're doing, but also getting more resource. Obviously, we're a larger organisation, so we were able to get more support and resourcing for it. And as a result, we now we're given an additional budget for this external moderation. So we've taken on Arwin AI, who are an AI agency. And I'm like very aware, full disclosure, this is a very, very expensive solution. But just to give you an idea of things that are out there, if the budget allows, Arwin AI are a moderation agency that sort of triages the comments before it comes into our engagement platform. So very clear instances of online hate that the AI indicates and realizes, including things like spam, are triaged ahead of coming into our kind of human moderator team. And that has just changed the whole situation for us, vastly reducing, obviously, the time and the quantity of comments that we're looking at. But we've also seen that the more positive comments that appear on our pages, the less of the negativity you get. You take the negativity out and you see the positivity flourish more and more. And we're really seeing that once you tackle this, it allows people to come forward more in the comments, where they might have not wanted to put themselves forward before. And we also have had some support around resourcing for wellbeing, and the kind of HR team have basically taken that a bit more seriously. We had some workshops with a workplace psychologist about establishing work boundaries and burnout. So I think generally it's just by tackling this head on, and it's really highlighted to the organisation the pressures that it puts teams under who are dealing with this. And we've also given that support, like Rowan says, to our spokespeople. And we've definitely found that people are much more willing to work with us on social media. And to be honest, I'm more confident working with people on social media. Or if someone says to me, I'm a bit nervous because I had a bit of a bad time last time, I have felt much more prepared to say to them, actually, we have this in place. I can't promise you it might not happen, but we have got things in place to help. So that's really changed. I think, yeah, that's kind of our general feedback. It's been a few months. We'll see how it goes. But we're definitely feeling more confident. And I think that's a big part of the battle here. We haven't yet had a huge kind of, reputational issue to challenge us since these came in. We've just had our, everyday ongoing problems. But I certainly feel more equipped for it. Yeah.
Charlie, that's really interesting to hear about the outcomes and everything. What does that enable you to do, as a team? How can you, so if it's making you feel more confident, is it changing what you're able to do in your everyday work? Is it giving you time back or anything like that?
Yeah, I'd say, well, certainly, obviously, with Arwin AI triaging the comments, we have just immediate time back because the volume is much less. But the goal out of this really was to, our moderation team was spending so much time on hateful comments and moderating to create a safe space that we weren't really able to actually have fun, engaging conversation like you want to have on social media. So really it's allowing our teams more time to talk to the people that are, there for the right reasons, that want to have a nice chat, that want to ask questions about history, they want to learn something, they want to be inspired. And we want to spend more time on those people and those conversations. So the more time we have, the more the positivity flourishes, and it just kind of is a snowball effect, I guess. And that's the hope moving forwards, that we'll have more time to do it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We had a few questions and I just wanted to kind of go back to them. One of them was about, so Rowan touched on this a bit, but the question is, how are the house rules shared with people, say people on paid adverts where they are not your usual audience? How would you get them to see those, the house rules or the guidelines?
So this was actually something that is now in our moderation guidelines for our team. So basically, for our paid ads, we were finding, as someone said before, it's very difficult to understand if it's an onslaught of bots and whether they're real people. It does sometimes feel like that it's different to the organic comments. And we did feel that there was some sort of calculated commenting going on. So we'll find that some ads will just snowball and you'll have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments. And we now have a threshold. So if we have to have moderated 50 comments or above, we will comment just a sort of pinned post on, say, a Facebook ad saying just a reminder of the house rules. If you have broken these house rules, your comment will be moderated, and then that links to the house rules. And it's a reminder of the house rules. If people are seeing comments disappear, then they'll know why. It also means for the people that are there reading the nasty comments that they know that we're present and that we're not happy with what's going on. We're not agreeing to it, which was a big thing for us to kind of be visible. And then, yes, it links to the house rules. And actually, we've had to do that a handful of times now since these new rules were in place. And almost immediately, it stemmed the comments quite quickly, which I was really shocked by, because I thought that it might garner like a negative reaction from there. But it has seemed to work so far for us. And then basically we've got to a point now where if we reach 200 moderated comments on a paid ad, we'll reset the ad. So that was also a decision that was made. So you've got 50 and you get the comment, and then 200 you reset the ad, and we kind of start again on the comments.
Thank you. I think a really important point is that one of the questions we were asked in advance was about should you be visible, and you're talking in very positive terms about the impact that's had for you. But one of the conversations we had as a group beforehand was that we are not saying there is one way to do this, that it might be different for different organisations. And I think we'll come back to that, won't we? That this is an approach that's worked for you, but other people might see it differently, and there's lots of debate to be had. There's another question which I'll ask the others as well. Is it asking whether you have considered moving away from X in the light of what the questioner is saying are ethical and practical considerations? Do you discuss your choice of platforms and kind of constantly reevaluate that?
So I'll answer this quickly. From our end, actually, our biggest problem for online hate was Facebook and sometimes Instagram. So for us, we've seen X engagement drop off so dramatically that, funnily enough, not getting so much of a problem there. But I know that's not true for everyone. So that's just in our case.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Rowan, is there anything that you wanted to respond to, either in what Charlie's saying or in terms of any of the questions we've had?
No, I saw a question which was about how do you differentiate between, how do you distinguish between negative comments and online hate? Sorry, I haven't read all of the questions. And I think for me, it's really useful to, in this process that we did here, we went back through the moderation logs, and what I did was I devised this set of guidelines, and then I tried them out against real life questions to see whether they would kind of pass the test. And as a group, Charlie and John and Laura at HRP and myself, we kind of had a session where we went through them all, and we kind of found a consensus on where we thought that line was. So sometimes it was like specific words. We felt that there were some words which are nearly always used in an offensive way. Not always. There are certainly sort of sentiments which are clearly hateful, for example. But what we found really useful for transferring this consensus to the moderators and the moderation team was drawing up a list of examples and kind of going through it with them, and kind of saying, right, we now think this would fail because of this rule. Or, as often happens, we now think that this comment would fail because of these 3 rules. Like, very often a rule will be offensive in more ways than one in regards to your house rules when you really start articulating these things. I know there's a link to HRP's house rules so that people can have a look at them. So those are the public rules. And then what we did as well was that we drew up, unsurprisingly, much longer sort of set of guidelines that really help the moderators understand those and that really articulate things like what Charlie was saying about when you would reply, when you might reset a paid ad, for example, when you might block someone. So that's kind of a bit more of the detail in regards to that question.
Thank you very much. We've got lots of other questions coming in, but what I'm going to do is ask Danielle and Haydn to join us, because I think we want to hear from them as well, and just see what other kind of perspectives we've got on that. Are you, Charlie and Rowan, are you all right to sort of stay here? Because I think we might sort of carry on chipping in at the end. Thank you. Hello, everybody. And so Danielle, I'll sort of come first to you, sort of listening to what the other two are saying. How does this sort of reflect the way that you approach some of this, some of these issues at the National Trust? What are you hearing? What's making you think about?
I think I could just sit here and go, yeah, everything that Charlie said. And it would be, how I feel and the work that we need to be doing. Within the trust specifically, I think we've had a lot of historic fear to battle. So in 2020, before my time here, we released a report on colonialism and slavery that caused, I think, it was the first time that the social team here had really had to deal with that kind of abuse, hatred, vitriol. And that has hung over for quite a while, everything that we've done. When we try to be more inclusive, be more diverse, and people go, but do you remember the colonialism report? Do we want that to happen again? And the guidelines that Rowan and Charlie have been talking about, doing those kind of things has really helped us with the stakeholder management part of this, which I think for large organizations is a really, really important part. Like Charlie was saying, when it's working, they don't see the issues that you're having. So going to our senior leadership team and going, no, sorry, but here's the numbers, here's the screenshots, here's the things the team are dealing with every day. It's actually really important, and getting a top-down approach to the support that we're getting has been incredibly important to us. And out of that, we have done a similar thing in that we have external moderators now, in that we have a team of amazing freelancers who, as we're having issues, we can turn up and down the level of support we're getting. So, for example, during Pride Month this year, we had people in every day, and we were going, hey, can you spend a couple of hours doing this so that we don't have to, essentially. Sorry, I choked on my own words there. And I think the other part of it, once again, is what Charlie and Rowan were saying about having really clear guidelines, so it's not relying on your staff's personal opinion. You need to know what the organization thinks, not what you think. We have been incredibly lucky at the Trust in that we have some senior leadership team staff members who are actually quite social savvy. They are very on top of what's going on. So when we go, hey, we think this is going to be an issue, can you help us devise what the Trust believes their response is? They'll hop on and go, yes, of course, we can figure this out with you. And as part of that, we work incredibly closely with other teams. So when we're doing reactive or proactive risk management, whether we know something's coming or not, the external comms team are involved, our supporter services team are involved, the local teams are involved to ensure that what we are saying is consistent, because we know if we say something on social and then a slightly different message goes out in a media statement, we're actually just going to make it worse.
That's interesting, because we've had a question which is, how do social and press strategies inform each other, which is really kind of what you're speaking about, isn't it? and the connectedness of all the different parts of the organisation.
I think it's a really important thing. And it's something that when I joined the trust, they were doing, but maybe if anything now, we're probably over prepared, but I'd prefer that. We have, regular meetings, regular updates. We have issues lists where we go through. So earlier today, we had our bi-weekly issues call where representatives from each of our regions, because obviously we're nationwide, lots of properties, someone from supporter services, someone from external comms, someone from my team, we all go in and we go, right, what's going on at the moment? What's flared up? What are the issues? Are there any trends? What do we think is what's coming? And then sometimes if we know something is coming, and I probably shouldn't say this is fun, but it kind of is, we'll do a worst case scenario session where we'll go in and go, right, if we were discussing internet trolls, what would we be saying about this? Because that helps us generate our responses, our organizational points of view on things, when we can go, what will people say about this? And then actually it can be quite nice when it kicks off and you go, oh, we personally were much worse than anyone who's commenting on this.
Yeah. So preparing is really key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Haydn in. Haydn, have you sort of hearing all of this, and you've worked with other organisations, are there other organisations you've seen sort of dealing quite effectively with online abuse and hate? And have you got any other examples here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, everything everybody said has been brilliant. It's been really interesting to hear some of the POVs. If you're a smaller cultural organization, there's other things you can maybe try to do. So if you can do, if you know you've got campaigns coming up, or if you know that there's certain protected characteristics that you endorse, or that you're gonna that you hold dear to your organization, stuff like social listening can be really important for you guys, so that you have an understanding of what people are saying about these topics, or what the sentiment might be around certain subjects that you feel may be provocative, or that you feel unfortunately will drive hate towards you. It can be very helpful, especially if you're planning for a campaign, to do stuff like this, and it's quite easy to set up. So even if you don't have to have a big budget to set up some really basic social listening, you can use Google Alerts. You can use, if you're using a platform like Hootsuite, you can do it automatically with keywords. So there are some simple things that you can do to start the process of you actually preparing for what might come at you. But there are other ways you can do it as well. So I think Shakespeare Globe did a really good example of when the world attacked Shakespeare's Globe for having a Black Juliet. They got a Shakespeare historian who specifically worked on Romeo and Juliet, to actually outline all of the different types of people who have played Juliet over the years historically, just to almost to showcase what that might look like. So there's other ways that you can try and counter it, but there has to, I think ultimately the best way is what we've kind of discussed here. You have to have processes in place that allow you to say, okay, these are our rules, these are our hard decisions. And something that I'd never thought about, what I think was really interesting, what Charlie mentioned, was the fact that you're also actually protecting your own audience. And that's something I'd never actually thought about before, where it's not just where you're protecting your team, which is obviously important, but you're protecting your own audience as well, and creating an environment for you to actually build real community in the first place, which is what, for me, what social is about as well. And then I think finally, there's ways that you can protect your staff. So you're thinking about how you protect your staff and the well-being of your staff. And if you're somebody who's trying to do that, there's steps that you should take yourself. So don't be somebody who, if somebody's been attacked online, don't you then go online and try and attack somebody to defend your team, because that can only amplify the issue. So you just think about what steps you can take to protect your staff internally. So what that might look like, about how you communicate with them internally. So that might be an email, that might be you go and speak to them personally. Just thinking about all of these kind of things. And then simple things like taking off your phone. So some organizations don't allow you to have your social media accounts on your personal phone, for example. So just little things, little steps that might help you to kind of step away from it. Or you might have a time frame. You say, okay, if we know that we're going to put a post out that might be perceived as provocative, then we'll have a time frame where we're only going to be online for half an hour, either side of it. that way, so you can deal with anything, and then you're going to go away, leave it, and maybe come back to it at a different time. There's little things that you can do internally to try and help your team. And then I think lastly, trying to get that stakeholder buy-in from senior leadership can be difficult because there's a lack of empathy. And what I mean by this is sometimes the issues that are raised aren't issues that actually directly affect the people at senior leadership. So what that then means is that the empathy side of it is hard for them to actually buy into, because it's not something that they see. They can see it, but they don't understand what it's like to be judged by a protective characteristic. So they just see it and they don't see it as much. They think, oh, it's only social media, don't worry about it. So trying to find that the empathy storyline or the empathy narrative for your senior stakeholders, for them to actually understand the importance of why this is important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got lots of questions, and shortly we'll have a little break, and I'll go through those questions, then I'll come back and feed it. So you panelists, you might want to have a look at those in the break, and we'll come back to those afterwards. Has anybody got anything else that they want to just add in of the panel? Is there anything else that you would like to add in response to what each other is saying before we go to our short break? Go on, Charlie.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point kind of in response to this question around a wider comm strategy or comments reaching the press. So you've had something on social media which reaches the press, or something in the press then impacts social media, vice versa. I think something that I'm really aware of in looking at colleagues in the sector and kind of talking within our organisation is exactly what Danielle said. It's this fear does permeate, because we have seen things happen to other organisations in the press and on social, which scares us. But I do think there's a point here around putting hate into the context that it's actually in. And I've definitely think a good point here is to take a step back and exactly what Haydn said, use social listening, use the tools that you have to try and identify the level of problem that you're facing, because there's a real tendency, I think, to react quite strongly to a big flurry of online hate and think everyone in the world is hating this campaign, everyone disagrees with us, everyone thinks that our values are like ajar with what they want. And the reality often is either a vocal minority. The thing that I was saying before about the more hate we get on our comment on certain posts, it really does feed more hate. And people who want to say something positive and do support you as an organisation, they're not going to put their comment there, because all that will happen is they'll have a pile on from everyone in those comments who are already being negative. So what happens is you don't see the positivity. And I do see organisations, and I know I've seen it within my organisations I've worked within, where we have a gut reaction of a defence. But the defence is against a small minority, not the entire world, and we're almost over-calculating what our response is, and highlighting it to everyone that there is a big response. And I think a big thing for me there is what Haydn was saying around the safeguarding of your following. So if you're then responding to what you feel is an onslaught, highlighting it to more people, what you're actually doing is just highlighting a load of hate to people who hadn't seen it previously. And I personally don't think that that's a positive way to move forwards. So I much prefer, in terms of our guidelines and the way that we're working, is to try and focus on creating more positive spaces, as opposed to feeding the trolls and really going head to head with the hate, because you're not going to get very far. And hopefully, more positivity brings more positive followers with you.
Thank you.
Can I add on to the end of that? I think it also steps over into the safeguarding work you were talking about as well. As an example, at the moment, a huge amount of our conversations online are around people hating things to do with our AGM. But when I step away from work and talk to real people in real life, they go, oh, I had no idea that was a thing. And sometimes it's nice just to talk to people who don't work in the sector or in the area to sense check and go, actually, I can let go of this a little bit. It gives you permission to go, it's not as big a deal as I thought it was.
Okay, thank you. Any last thoughts from anybody else? All right, so we're starting to think about some of the ways in which you have either yourselves or advised others to move forward and respond and manage some of these issues. So just there was a couple of questions in there which are about how do you distinguish between sort of what's negative commentary and what's hateful? Where do you draw a line? How do you make that decision? And there was another question about how do you deal with what was described as dog whistles? So those kind of, you know, something that's intended to kind of get the emotions, raise emotions, I guess. Danielle, what kinds of principles might you use there?
We're going back again to having those clear policies, which you can use to actually set. Without those policies, then you're not going to be able to make that distinction. However, making the policies is the tough bit. Rowan and Charlie will be able to attest to that from the work they've been doing. I think on a very, very basic level, we go with, if it's about the organization, it's probably negativity. If it's about people, that's when it starts swerving. And if it's about protected characteristics, then it's 100% all the way over. Obviously, a lot more nuances, but trying to keep it really clear, the scale we're on.
Because you're not, as you're saying, you're trying to take opinion out of it, aren't you? You need some kind of rule somewhere along the line.
Which those dog whistles, the dog whistles are really where that comes in as well. We utilize the knowledge of our networking groups quite a lot. So we have a LGBTQ plus network who advises us on some of the stuff around our pride content and things, because dog whistles can be really difficult when people are going, what I've said isn't technically hate speech. And you're going, yes, but if you know the internet, it is.
Thank you. Anybody else got any comments on that? Haydn?
Daniel's last point is again something that we as a sector we need to kind of be more aware of, is understanding the internet, understanding platforms, and really keeping on top of culture, because a lot of the division that we see, or some of the hate or etc. that we come across on social media, is representative of the world that we live in. So it's stuff that we see in mainstream media as well as on social media and in comms in general. So keeping that kind of bigger picture view will help you both to stand back and say, okay, what if this is actually relevant to us? And then if you don't have like the kind of budgets to get in like a consultant to do it, maybe just start really simple. Define what trolls are to you. Define what hate speech looks like to you. There'll tend to be 3 or 4 different types of people that will come. So you'll get the people who are just trolling, who are just saying things to say things. And then you'll get people who I call a bit like hecklers at a comedy club, who are kind of saying things, but then maybe that you may be able to have some fun with it, depending on what kind of cultural organization you are. Then you'll have people who are just ignorant, full stop. And so it's you really defining what these people are to you as a cultural organization, and you haven't, again, as everybody's kind of banged on about having a position, but if you can just define what those people look like for you, you can then determine how you're going to respond accordingly.
Thank you.
I'm happy to share if just a few of the decisions that we made in terms of how we were going to distinguish it with Rowan, in terms of what we hide and what we don't now. So like misinformation, for example, if someone has made a comment but it is just misinformed and we can correct them, that's the sort of comment we will reply to. So as an organisation, we aim to reply and correct any misinformation that's out there. And you're allowed to challenge us as an organisation, like Danielle says. So if you challenge the organisation or you come up with some sort of debate that's aimed at HRP in general, that's generally, going to pass the moderation test. Whereas if it's against individuals, it won't. And the off-topic comments that Rowan discussed earlier about that really changed the game for us in terms of how we were defining what was allowed and what wasn't in our spaces. So a really practical example from us was if you are discussing immigration on a topic, a post which is about the history of 18th century royal court and the different people that worked within that court and where they came from, you're allowed to discuss immigration on that post. It's relevant to the discussion. If it's on a post for our paid ads in relation to a model who is in that photograph, we don't allow it because it is not the topic of the post. And this is going to be different for different organizations in terms of where you draw the line. And we just decided that that was the line we would draw, because the posts are, people always use the argument of freedom of speech, but you can't come to our palaces and shout in the middle of our palaces your opinions if it's completely irrelevant to everyone around you, and you can't just scream that at people, and you can't do that in our online spaces either. So that was just in terms of practical steps we took, how we make those decisions now.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Just one thing, freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence. That really kind of frustrates me, that whole freedom of speech thing. Yes, you can say things, but it doesn't mean there's no consequence to the things you say. Yeah, sorry, I'll get off my high horse.
But it leads on to the next question. I was going to ask Rowan if she does have a thought on this, but somebody's been asking about what would you do about the, you know, if somebody comes on your website and names and shames. Let me just get the question, the actual question. Where has it gone? How do you have any thoughts? I've come to you first, Rowan, and say if you don't, and I'll see if anybody else does. Have any organisations dealt with the naming and shaming of staff? We've experienced where a client has taken a picture of a member of staff without their consent, posted it online when they've been unhappy with the service. Now that obviously isn't, so that might not be so much of an arts and culture thing, but the same kind of thing would happen. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, it's so tricky, isn't it? I think, because somebody sent in this question before, and so I did have a bit of a think of it. So it is possible, depending on the context, it is possible that that is actually illegal behaviour. I caveat that by saying I am not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice and cannot give legal advice. But I believe you, in public spaces in the UK, you can take photos of people, and as a photographer, you own the rights to that. But that is not the same in private spaces. So if you don't have somebody's agreement, you cannot take a photo of them and publish it publicly. That's not okay, I don't think. It's also under GDPR, I think, as the possibility that someone's personal data is being violated in that instance. So I do feel that there is something to investigate there. I don't really know the full context. And I did see in that question that somebody submitted in the chat today, that they said they've tried to report it to the platforms to no avail. To which I guess I would say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You are absolutely not alone. We've all been in the situation where we have reported stuff that we think is outrageous to the platforms to no avail. I really hope in a year or 2 years that'll be a different situation with the Online Safety Act, and that they will be looking after us all better. The one thing that I can suggest, other than seeking kind of further legal advice on this kind of issue, because there is a serious safeguarding issue in there, is that the individual, my experience in this area is that the platforms take notice of individuals whose privacy is being flouted. They do not care about anybody else. So, for example, if this was happening to HRP, I would say to Charlie, get that individual who has been photographed and named to make the complaint, because they will not care about other, in my experience, they will not care about other organisations. So they wouldn't care about HRP coming and saying this is a violation, because you're still a third party. They're quite, you know, lots of their rules and how they implement them are sort of quite basic and not terribly nuanced. So it's kind of like, if it's not you, then they don't care. I don't know if that helps sufficiently. I'm sure other people have got something to say on this tricky one.
Yeah, so I think again with stuff like that, your documentation process would be really important. So how you document that, how that what happened, basically, especially with UK social media, unless the police think it's a threat, like a threat to a person or a building or something of that nature, or somebody's somebody won't be safe, the police can't get involved. And then as we know, when you escalate to social media, there's very little conversation had with the actual people at a platform. So just make sure if something like that does happen, trying to document as much as you can, because then when you do get through to either someone at a social platform, you've got the documentation to actually walk through everything. And if you're going to escalate it because you feel like it's a safety position to the police, then they're going to need to see a documentation of what happened as well. So just think about that, what that documentation process looks like for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Then the other, can I just ask it might be a Charlie thing, this, just as a really quick question. Why do you think there's more hate happening on your paid platforms than there is on the organic? And is that, is it a trend? Is it something we should notice? Is it something you can do anything about?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a trend, and it's something that a lot of organisations I've spoken to have had a similar issue. I think at its basics, it's because we're paying money for that post to go to lots of people. So you're having lots of eyes on that post. And those eyes are not necessarily your following. So it can be to do with the targeting for those paid ads and where that's going. If it's going onto people's feeds who are not your usual followers, which probably most of the time your targeting is aiming for that, because that's why you're paying for those ads, then you can get responses to those ads that are sort of different to what your organic audience might say, who might be more well-informed and have an invested interest in your organization. I think there's also, so we had a really interesting conversation when we took on our Arwin AI to help with our comments. They've worked previously with, they started their AI moderation service as a result of the racism after FIFA incident. So that's kind of where they started from. And something that they do for a lot of their clients is find the countries or accounts of origin for a lot of these comments. And I know we were talking about bots before, but just to say that if you feel like it's a concerted effort from groups, it probably is. And they have proven through IP addresses that there's huge swathes of accounts and profiles being created in from one IP address who's creating all these comments. And I had a bit of a suspicion with our paid ads that someone, because you can see all your paid ads if you go into someone's Facebook profile, Facebook makes public all of the ads that you've got serving. And if you become a target, people will go there. As soon as the ad is live, they'll go to your ad and they'll have a concerted effort against it. And sometimes that does happen to organizations. So it's not silly to think that that's happening, because unfortunately it is.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm noticing the time, so we've just got 6 minutes left for the webinar. So a couple of things to do is, one is just to bring John back in, and as he's coming back in, just to everybody else, I'm going to ask John to say something a little bit about the consultancy offer that from the space, and then I'll come back to all of you afterwards to sort of see, is there any other points that you haven't had a chance to make yet that you'd like to make briefly before the end? So John, do you want to say something about the consultancy offer that
yeah, just very briefly. Thanks so much, Linda, and thanks to all the panelists as well. And I think hopefully what people have seen is there's a lot of really practical stuff and a lot of common advice that you can take from this and just go away and do on your own if you want to. And the toolkit on the website, which is free to download, has also got a lot of practical advice in there if you want to take that as your starting point. If there's anyone who thinks that more sort of hands-on and in-depth approach that Rowan and I went through with HRP, any elements of that might be suitable for you or relevant, then yeah, we do offer that, and we can tailor that to budget and need and what your priorities are. So again,
it's just a minute each, really. Is there anything else that I'll start with Rowan. Is there a comment or a point that you either picking up on something or something that you haven't had a chance to say yet you think is a really useful in this context?
Yeah, I think I've got sort of like, I feel like if I could give people 3 takeaways from what I recommend from everything that we've been talking about, would be firstly to kind of put your risk assessment hats on around your comms in general, to think about the risks of what you're saying. That doesn't mean I'm not for a moment saying don't do stuff. I'm just thinking about kind of, you know, how you can protect people in videos, how you can safeguard your teams, how you can take out the hooks, you know, certain words in comms, for example, just to really kind of, you know, come from a foundation of kind of having a framework, having a policy, and having thought about this stuff in advance, because that's very often where people come unstuck. They haven't thought about it in advance. The second one is to have an organizational comms strategy which sits across your social media, your marketing, your press and PR, for example, so that it sort of filters down and that all of those people are kind of somehow talking to one another as though they work together. And then the last one is to also have, in addition to that, an emergency comms strategy, which at its most basic can be just like a list of who you need to get on a WhatsApp group or who you need to get on a phone call if the metaphorical shit hits the fan, who's going to make decisions about what to do, so that it's not just some poor, possibly poorly paid, you know, the person at the very bottom of the social media tree sitting there at 11 p.m. going, shit, I don't know what to do. Do you know what I mean? So those are that's my takeaways.
Thank you. Charlie, what would yours be?
I think the main thought that's come out of the back of all of this work and thinking about it a lot has been that originally when I thought of online, like responses to online hate, from organizations, I'd think of like bold organizational statements and how people have come out online and they've like shown the haters, you know, what they think. And actually after thinking about this and working on it for a while, I'd argue that the best response to hate now is when you take action to prevent more people from seeing hate. I think the best thing we can do is try and protect our online communities from reading lots of hate and create those online spaces. And the best response is to nip the conversation in the bud, not these big, bold statements, which have their place. And I'm different organizations will have different opinions on that. And, you know, that does have its place. But for me, establishing that the organization doesn't stand for the hate, won't allow it to continue, and have a more positive dialogue is really what I'm aiming for at the end of this.
Thank you. And Haydn, what would your last thought be?
I think mine is a quick one. It would just be that it's an evolving process. So it's not one and done. You will learn more that you do it. It will evolve. There'll be different iterations of it. Don't be scared of it. And also social media, there's like 1 billion odd posts a day that like people forget very quickly. So don't fear it as much as we have a lot of fear behind it, and just relax. You'll survive. No one will die.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'm just going to say that we're putting a link into chat to your mentoring program. We haven't really got time to talk about it, but Haydn was speaking to us earlier about some mentoring that he's offering. So have a look at that link. Thank you very much. Danielle, what was your last point? And then I'll come to John for a final one.
Super speedy bullet points. I'll give you some little sound bites. Just because something's being said on the internet a lot doesn't make it true in real life. Later done well is better than now done badly. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And your well-being comes first.
Thank you very much. And also on that note, I think we've also got a link to, we noticed that the Arts Marketing Association are doing a webinar next week on wellbeing, which might be of interest to people. So we're going to put that one in as well. Thanks, Danielle. And John, was there anything that you wanted to say at the end of that, just from a space
No,
perspective?
just thank you very much to everyone. I'm conscious we're 1 minute over time, so and I can't add to all those excellent wrap-up points, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, thank you, audience, for contributing all the questions. Thank you to our panel for sharing so honestly and frankly. That's really, really appreciated.